I created an expansion to the world's most obscure board game. How did I do it? And why? Well, let's start from the beginning. Live Alive, launched in the mid-90s exclusively in Japan on the SNES, this RPG is somewhat of a hidden gem, which never got a Western release, and thus never garnered the popularity of its rivals in Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. But nevertheless, it's a uniquely charming game, which has influenced countless modern games, even some released as recently as a few months ago. But why is this almost 30-year-old game relevant to a board game? Well, Live Alive recently received a remaster for the Nintendo Switch, a project which served to both introduce the game to Western audiences and spruce the game up with Square Enix's exceptional new HD 2D engine. The new game is a visual masterpiece, and the presentation of the game's unique story and concept is remarkably elevated as a result. And it's clear to see that Square Enix were willing to put their trust in this game, not only by the fact that the game received such a magnificent transformation, but also through the collector's edition of the game. This was released exclusively in Japan and contained many of the staple products, a soundtrack CD, art book, a shoulder bag, and even a model kit. But there's one final goodie, one which I don't think I've ever heard of being included in a collector's edition for a video game before. A board game. This is a two-player competitive board game, which pits players against each other in a combat scenario which mimics the gameplay of the video game, and features the game's 8 main protagonists: Pogo from Prehistory, the Shifu from Imperial China, Oboromaru from Edo, Japan, Sundown from the Wild West, Masaru Takahara from Present Day, Akira Tadakoro from Near Future, Cube from Distant Future, and Orsted from the Middle Ages. Players will take turns drafting a team of 4, and then use action cards to deal damage to their opponent's characters, with the aim of knocking out 2 characters to win. These action cards represent skills which the video game counterparts have access to, with many of them being iconic moves: Sundown's gun techniques, Akira's psionic abilities, the Shifu's martial arts, and so on. The board game was translated and ported to Tabletop Simulator by members of the Live Alive community, and it's a surprisingly faithful recreation of how combat in the game plays out. You've got strategic choices in where to place different characters, the order of action cards, and using action cards with charge times, which are powerful but risk being interrupted. It's a lot more fun than I was initially expecting for a board game included as a collector's edition freebie. But as I was playing this board game, one thing was missing. One of the real charms of Live Alive is not only the different scenarios the game explores, but the eclectic cast of characters present in each one. The timeless allies of the prehistory scenario in Gori and Beru, the Shifu's 3 disciples in Lei Kugo, Hong Haka, and Yuinzhou, Near Future's stalwart man of action Lawless, the brooding rival Strabo. The list is endless. So much so that I was left wanting more from the board game. As fun as the experience was, 8 characters with 3 unique actions each meant that playing more than 4 or 5 games would result in the same characters and often the same strategies appearing again and again. So with that in mind, I set out to create an expansion, a project to add more playable characters to the Live Alive board game. My aims with this were threefold. First, to add many of the key characters from Live Alive's many scenarios, and ensure that most, if not all, of the no-brainer characters were included. 2, to ensure that these new characters were appropriately balanced, and didn't feel too strong compared to the base game characters. As this was an expansion, the main 8 characters from the base game would still be playable and need to interact with these new characters. And I didn't want any of the new characters to eclipse or invalidate the base game's cast. And thirdly, to introduce some new game mechanics to gel these 2 packages together. This was less so something I set out to do at the start, but something that emerged as I started designing moves for each of the new characters. But more on that later. This won't be spoiler-free for those of you who haven't played Live Alive. I'll be going into detail about each of the scenarios and many of the characters that feature within, so you've been warned. One thing to note before we delve in is about some of the mechanics on action cards called keywords. These are usually additional effects or aspects of a move, of which the base game has interrupt, pushback, linear, and debuff. Interrupt is self-explanatory. A character hit by a move with an interrupt keyword will have any charge attacks interrupted. Pushback works the same way, but will also push the foe back one space away from the attacker. Linear moves will only target the first opponent within range, and cannot target enemies behind them, and debuff will add a token to a character, which results in 1 less damage dealt and 1 more damage taken. Ultimately, I decided on 10 new characters for the expansion. Gory and Beru from Prehistory, the Prisoner from Edo, Japan, Mad Dog from the Wild West, all 3 of the Shifu's disciples from Imperial China, Lawless from Near Future, Captain Square from the Distant Future, and Strabo from the Middle Ages. So let's break them down one by one. Let's start with Beru, for which the philosophy here was twofold: to give her good synergy with Pogo, and to develop the existing design space for healing. This led to Bam Bam Bam, a standard melee hit which deals more damage if the target is debuffed or interrupted, and Sing Heal, a small AoE heal which also removes debuff. To round out her kit, I settled on Sing Hurt as her iconic move, to offer a large AoE attack, albeit without the power of something like Sundown's Hurricane. The end result is a fragile but capable character that excels in area of effect abilities and can deal some decent damage with the right team built around her. With only 6 HP, she can't stay on the front line for long, but her support capabilities are among the best in the game. Next is Gory, who boasts a hearty 9 HP, and with him we introduced both of the new keywords added in the expansion. I decided to hone in on the moves that set Gory apart from Pogo. Poop Throw was an obvious choice, as it's a staple move used throughout the scenario. The other 2 moves settled on were Yum Chomp, which introduces the Leech keyword, and Chest Pound, which introduces the Displace keyword. Leech is a straightforward one. The attacker will heal for as much damage as they deal, though it's worth noting that this accounts for debuffs as well. If Gory's Yum Chomp attacks a debuffed opponent, he'll deal 4 damage, and heal for 4 damage, rather than the usual 3. Displace, on the other hand, works similarly to Pushback, in that it interrupts enemy charge actions, but rather than moving them back to another tile, the inflicting player can rotate the opponent's piece 90 degrees. Additionally, players can use one movement to rotate up to 180 degrees on their turn, in order to try to counter an opponent's strategy with any excess movement. This direction system features in the video game as well, but for the expansion I decided to flesh this aspect out and design some characters to take advantage of this. So overall, Gory is a new take on a frontline unit who seeks to cripple the opponents and sustain himself, rather than deal damage like Masaru. Next, it's time for the disciples from Imperial China: Hong Haka, Lei Kugo, and Yuin Zhou. With all of the disciples, my aim was to take advantage of their exclusive skills to ensure they all feel unique, while sprinkling in aspects similar to the Shifu where possible, to honour his role as their teacher. Starting with Hong, the aim here was to create another durable frontline unit, who could be a powerful damage dealer with the right technique. Many of Hong's moves boast high power with charge times, as well as low movement. Bear's Claws is the best example of this, being a powerful move if Hong can position himself appropriately. Pepper and Pork Stir Fry is a strong AoE, and gives a bit of movement to assist his other moves. And last but certainly not least, is Pork's Second Cooking, one of the most unique moves in the entire expansion. This is an AoE charge attack which deals damage equal to Hong's missing health. This is a high risk, high reward move which can be extremely threatening if an opponent missteps, and overcommits to damage without a way to finish Hong off. And with Hong's 8 HP, the ceiling for damage on this move is immense. Lei Kugo is the opposite in many ways. With only 5 HP, she's one of the most fragile characters in the game. However, this comes as a trade-off for unmatched power, combo potential, and mobility. Cat's Reproach is a move that draws inspiration from Shifu's Monkey's Withdrawal, allowing Lei to reposition after her attack. This sets up nicely for Starlight Strike, which deals double damage and then debuffs the opponent if she targets the opponent from behind. This combo of attacks is powerful, but exposes Lei to the enemy, so is best saved for a finisher. Her third and final attack is Kingfisher's Tantrum, a move with exceptionally limited targeting, but has high power, high movement, and a short charge time. These skills make Lei a great damage dealer, albeit one who won't get very far without both restraint and technique. Last is Yuin Zhou. He sits between Hong and Lei at 6 HP, but can interrupt enemy actions with Icebrand's Bite, or offer small AoE damage in a wide area with Whirlwind's Dismay. His ultimate move is Tempest's Torment, a 2-charge move which only targets a single tile, but if it lands, it's powerful enough to deal a killing blow to most characters who have taken a hit already, or some outright. From the Edo Japan scenario, we have Ryoma Sakamoto, otherwise known as the Prisoner. In this scenario, he excels as a supporting character to Waboromaru, with a variety of gun attacks. This offered inspiration for Wolf's Fang and Warning Shot, 2 linear attacks with exceptional range, which can offer debuff and displacement effects on demand. His third attack, North Star, is a reasonably strong melee hit, which can be used to finish off enemies, albeit at the risk of exposing the prisoner to follow-up attacks if you're not careful. Next is Mad Dog, Sundown's dogged rival from the Wild West. In the board game, Sundown's role is clear: deal damage from afar with ranged attacks and land a decisive blow with Hurricane, a high-power AoE attack. Mad Dog is similar in some ways. His ability Sidewinder is identical to Sundown's Double Shot, But Texas Jitterbug is a departure from this identity, instead allowing Mad Dog to deal AoE damage around himself and displace enemies. While risky, this can be a powerful attack in the right circumstances, and sets an opponent up for a follow-up with Ride the Lightning, which deals bonus damage if the target is facing away from Mad Dog. Lawless is the representative from the near future, who serves the role of a powerful damage-dealing frontline bruiser. Gut Punch is a great opening move, which interrupts and deals bonus damage if the target is facing Lawless head-on, especially against opponents that might want to set up charge moves like Gory. Lightning Uppercut can be used to debuff, and provides a hefty 2 damage to boot, whereas Fists of Rage is another strong AoE attack that targets the area in front of the user, like Hong's Bear's Claws, albeit not quite as strong. This moveset makes Lawless a formidable frontliner, who's been among the favourites of myself and others I've playtested with. Now for a more unusual choice, Captain Square. As the playable character featured in the arcade game in the Distant Future scenario, it was obvious that his moves had to feature some of the more iconic moves from that minigame. Therefore, Pion Bomb was an obvious choice, which offers a powerful AoE around Square himself, albeit with a long charge time. Tachyon Sword offered another opportunity to utilise the Leech keyword, and establish Square as a character willing to step forward more, and Spinning Star offers a way to interrupt enemy actions with good range and damage to boot. And last but certainly not least is Strabo. As the counterpart to the durable Knight Orsted, Strabo's role in the fan expansion was clear: Glass Cannon. Red Ballet offers easy to utilise damage on demand, whereas Icebind and Blue Squall are incredibly powerful AoE attacks, which can ravage opponents if Strabo can land them. Though these powerful attacks come at the cost of a poor 5 HP and long charge times. Now that we've covered the 10 new characters, let's talk about the other characters who could have been included but didn't make the cut. From prehistory, the only real omission here would be Zaki. While a charming character, Gory and Beru were already the two obvious choices from prehistory, and his moveset seemed too limited to justify adding a third prehistory character. The expansion then adds every character that comes to mind from Imperial China and the Wild West, but there is one character missing from Edo Japan, that being the Mimic Mammoth, often referred to as Orobo, given that he's a mechanical clone of Oboromaru. This would have been an amusing option if nothing else, and he could have simply used other moves in Oboromaru's moveset, but ultimately the idea didn't offer enough on its own. The present day and distant future scenarios offer no other playable characters, so now let's look at the big two, near future and Middle Ages. For the former, many who know Live Alive will be thinking of Toroimo, the cyborg companion who features in most of the near future scenario. The challenge here was in the moveset. Toroimo's techniques are determined by his equipped accessories, which made narrowing down 3 actions for him quite challenging. So much so that by the time I'd even made a start on figuring out what a good moveset for Toroimo might look like, every other new character had been designed and locked in. Though if I ever decide to add more characters to the expansion, Toroimo is the obvious choice. The other characters to add would be the last of Orsted's stalwart companions in Uranus and Hash. Hash was the real sore spot here, as many of his attacks are moves that Orsted himself can use, with 2 already featured in his board game counterpart as well. While it would have been possible to make a unique moveset for Hash, the challenge was making his role and gameplay feel different from that of Orsted. Uranus, on the other hand, had a much more obvious role in a healer and damage-dealing hybrid. However, adding both Strabo and Uranus without Hash would have felt strange, so ultimately he was omitted as well. With all these additional characters developed and added to the existing base game roster, the other challenge came from adjusting the existing game setup. In the base game, drafting your team of 4 is done as follows. Player 1 draws 2 character cards and picks 1 for their own team, with the other being drafted into player 2's team. Then player 2 draws and repeats the process until both players have a team of 4. But now with 18 total characters in the mix, new drafting rules were required. The solution I opted for was to have each player draw 4 characters, pick 1, and return the 3 others to the deck. With so many more characters, the old method would run the risk of one player ending up with too fragile a team, or a team without any reliable damage dealers. This way both players would be able to adjust their draft as they go, based on what their team is lacking. So that's that! If the fan expansion sounds like something appealing to you, you can find it on the Steam Workshop and play it for yourself. It was a fun endeavour to flex my game design passion, and it's been a lot of fun to play with my own friend groups. And even though the Live Alive board game is something that will likely remain obscure and forgotten, I'll always cherish it as a symbol of the confidence Square Enix had in the HD 2D remake of Live Alive. It was my game of the year for 2022, and one that I hope gets all the love and recognition it deserves. And if nothing else, it beats playing Monopoly.